Thank you so much for your time and being here today. I'm going to start out a little on transitory inflation. Dr. Cohn, the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve spent most of 2021 assuring the American people that the inflation they were seeing was merely transitory and that no action was needed. You know, what followed was the worst rate of inflation since the early 1980s when the Federal Reserve finally changed course. But you know, inflation hits rural areas like Montana's 2nd District that I represent the hardest. So how did the Federal Reserve get this, wrong for so long?
I think, first of all, the Federal Reserve was not alone in getting it wrong. Most economists had it wrong. So if you look at surveys of economists, they had that wrong. Secondly, I think we need to recognize how unique and unusual the situation was. Once a century, the global economy closes down because of a pandemic, right? So 1918 and last time. So there's really no precedent. How to analyze this, what's going on, how soon it's going to unwind is very, very difficult. And thirdly, I think to the Fed's credit, they recognized they made a mistake and they tightened quite substantially in 2021. And they would be the first to tell you, no, we should have gone a little earlier. Right. If we knew now, if we had good foresight, we would have gone earlier. But it was a very difficult situation to separate the supply effects, when they were going to run off, versus the demand effects and tightening policy.
Yeah, thank you. Switching here a little bit, this is Mr. Wang. You know, the United States now exceeds $36 trillion in debt. That's over $100,000 per person. Staggering. The United States pays more on its interest than it does on national defense every year. And at our current pace, the interest on our debt will be the second largest U.S. expenditure by 2035 after Social Security. Chairman Powell has repeatedly stated our national debt is on an unsustainable path. So what does an actual debt crisis look like, and how much longer can the U.S. stay on this debt path?
I think in the case of the United States, we are special in that we can print our own currency. And so in that sense, we can always afford our debts. But there are macroeconomic consequences to this, where that could be ultimately place upward pressure on inflation.
Thank you. Switching again, this is for Dr. Michel, and I know that Chairman Hill asked a similar question to Dr. Cohn, but I'm going to try to rephrase, and I'd love to hear yours. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate of stabilizing prices and maximizing employment. We also know an economy that's too hot is likely to suffer from high inflation, and the Federal Reserve has had to react to the trillions of dollars in spending from congressional Democrats during the 117th Congress by raising interest rates. And, I noticed in your opening remarks that you said, Congress gives the Fed too much to do and too much discretionary authority. But my question to you is, would the Federal Reserve be more effective if its sole mandate was to achieve stable prices?
Yes, no, I believe it would. You would be giving it something to do that it could actually control and that it could actually directly affect, as opposed to something that's nebulous and very difficult to define, much less control.
Thank you. Dr. Cohn, back to you. During the first 2 years of the Biden administration, congressional Democrats spent trillions of dollars in economic stimulus despite early warning signs of inflation. Does this sort of unprecedented spending make the Federal Reserve's job of combating inflation more difficult?
So I think the Fed still had the tools to combat inflation. I think what disappointed me a bit was that they took so long to use them, and they should have seen the demand-enhancing effects of those spending, and that should have sent their antennas quivering perhaps a bit faster on that inflation. So the Fed could have fought the inflation, but there was difficulty analyzing it and difficulty figuring out when to move.
Right. Well, I thank you for your answers, and unfortunately, I've run out of time, so Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back.